brought all my rowdy friends for the biggest panel of the day on investing in networks and reducing deployment barriers. We've been talking about barriers to broadband deployment all day, and we wanted to end with some of our experts and some of our members to talk about some of the most pressing issues that they're facing, but not just some of the challenges. We also wanted to talk about some of our successes and to start there. And let me first introduce our panel, and then I'll just sort of lay just a little bit of groundwork, and then we'll sort of get right into it. To my immediate left, we have Jill Sanford. Jill's the Chief Legal Officer from First Light Fiber. To her left, we have Andy Lippman. Andy, not Tamer, graciously agreed to fill in. Tamer is home with the flu, and so Andy's going to dig into the memory banks and basically sort of channel Tamer with respect to railroad crossings, et cetera. To his left, we have Van Blois. Van is the Senior Counsel at Crown Castle. To Van's left, we have Kelly McGriff, the Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for Unity Group. And then you all know Lindsay Stern at the very end from ENCOMPAS. So let me just sort of set the stage here a little bit, as I did, I think, with 12 gigahertz. And then we'll get right into some questions for our distinguished group of panelists. In recent years, I think among federal, state, local policymakers, there appears to be, real meaningful recognition of the inherent challenges that industry is facing when it's deploying broadband and next generation networks. At the FCC, what we've seen is that this has led to things like the third wireline infrastructure order, which was mentioned earlier today by Commissioner Carr. It also gave us One Touch Make Ready. We also had the small cell order, a declaratory ruling on pole attachments, and an order on bringing competitive access to multiple tenant environments. The pandemic then put a spotlight really on the need for universal internet connectivity. And we've seen historic levels of federal and state investment in bringing broadband to unserved and now underserved communities. I'm speaking, of course, about the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan, the Consolidated Appropriations Bill, and the Infrastructure Act. The sheer amount of federal investment that's gone into deploying networks is really breathtaking. And with as many opportunities as it presents, it also presents challenges, which we've heard from, obviously, from many of our policymakers today, and those at the FCC, NTIA, and Treasury. At the same time, it's important to remember what industry has been up to during this time. Builders, providers, they've continued their efforts at all levels to work collaboratively to address issues related to streamlining and unreasonable permitting. And there are a lot of successes, I think, that are worth celebrating. So that's where we are going to start today. We are going to start with successes. I'm going to start with Jill. What lessons are there to be learned from your experience over the last 3 or 4 years? What have some of those successes been, and what can we take away from that?
Sure. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, ENCOMPAS, for inviting me and allowing First Light to participate. Just before I answer the question, I just want to set the tone as to who First Light is. We operate in 6 states, mostly in New England and the Mid-Atlantic. We have 25,000 route miles, 13,000 on-net locations with 125,000 locations that are serviceable. We have 17,000 customers. We did something very interesting in 2019 in that we acquired a construction company. And what that allowed us to do in the middle of a global pandemic is to construct 10,000 route miles in our geography. Now, in the midst of that construction, we obviously faced some barriers, some challenges. However, as Chris said, we've actually had some successes. I mean, it's been very heartening today to see the alignment between industry, our elected officials, our regulators. And one example I do want to share of a success was with New York State. In 2019, New York State enacted a use and occupancy statute with attendant incredibly onerous fees as well as permitting survey requirements. Through an industry coalition where participants, Crown Castle, my colleague on the panel was also a participant, as well as other providers in New York, we were able to work with the legislature, the governor's office, DOT, and successfully have that statute repealed. And the reason we were able to do that was when we pointed out to the elected officials and decision makers that they were creating a barrier to deployment for unserved and underserved folks in the state of New York, it resonated with them. And we had a lot of folks say, oh, they'll never listen, you'll never get them to repeal it. We were successful. Another success we've had was actually in the state of New Hampshire. In our geography, many of our states are reverse preemption for pole attachments. So while the FCC has done a lot of good work, we really have to focus on the state commissions. Just this fall, New Hampshire enacted a rule providing for one-touch make-ready. Now, that's something we have been advocating for at the federal and state levels for many years. So while it may seem that there's still work to be done, we did want to point out and start the panel that when we work together as an industry coalition, as well as with our partners in government, we can work through these issues for our common goals.
I appreciate you taking a step back, Jill, and also just talking a little bit about your business model. Let me go to Van and Kelly. Same question. Could you guys just describe who you are as a company and then any successes that you could point to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Van with Crown Castle, in case you didn't know. Crown Castle is the nation's leading provider of shared infrastructure. So that means we own 40,000 wireless towers that folks can come co-locate on. We have 85,000 route miles of fiber, 115,000 small cells on air or under contract. So we serve a diverse group of customers that include schools, hospitals, other wireless carriers, large businesses and enterprises. We have a huge customer base, public safety agencies, cable providers, WISPs. So we do it all, and we do it in all 50 states and territories. I would say I would agree with all of that Jill just brought up in terms of our successes. I think the FCC's orders in 2018 in terms of the 253 and 332 streamlining, those were fantastic. Those really did a great service to ensuring that we have the tools to deploy 4G and 5G small cells, as well as the one-touch make-ready order, which was pretty groundbreaking at the time to consider that sort of streamlining in terms of pole attachments. It was pretty fabulous. And like Jill said, we operate in a number of states that are reverse preemption states, like New Hampshire, which just enacted one-touch make-ready. And they see the FCC as the leader on these issues. And when they see something like one-touch make-ready pass at the federal level at the FCC, often they'll sort of wait a couple of years and make sure that the sky hasn't fallen, and then they'll go about passing those reforms themselves. So I think we've seen that now that we've lived with one-touch make-ready for almost 5 years. We've seen a number of state legislatures and state commissions go about implementing some of those reforms that the FCC did several years ago. And I would say sort of the last point is we've had some success in the last few years in convincing utility pole owners to align some of their power delivery with make-ready timelines. So when you apply to attach to a pole, you have to make the pole ready for the attachment. There are specific timelines under the FCC, and state commissions have specific timelines under which the utility pole owner has to make the pole ready. And then our equipment can be installed, but without power, we're not able to move forward with our deployment because we can't light it up. And so ensuring that the utility pole owner, who's also providing the power, is aligning those timelines so that when we install the small cell on the pole, we're able to light it up as quickly as possible. I think that's been a success story of ours in the last few years.
Kelly?
First of all, why are we last? We're we're the people that actually do the work, and we're always last, right when the bar just gets set up. So I'm Kelly McGriff with Unity. We have fiber. Either we run it or we own it own all of Windstream's fiber in all 48 lower states. Through our company Unity Fiber, we also run a massive network. We have tons of folks on our fiber network from the federal government, state governments, county, municipal governments, schools, hospitals, mom and pop grocery stores, Walmart, pretty much everybody. We don't do fiber to the home. We don't do telephone. We don't do cable. Every time I call a mayor, oh God, I'm so glad you're coming into town. Our cable TV is horrible. Oh, no, we don't do that. Oh well, at least you'll be getting good connectivity to folks' homes. No, we don't do that either. Yeah. But there have been some good successes over the last couple of years. Chairman Pai, I think, really cracked things open at the FCC for that. Doug Dimitroff and your guy you work with, Ken Simon, and we were there for a lot of that with the Broadband Deployment Advisory Commission. One thing that Doug and I worked on a lot, and Ken, were the municipal model code and the state model code. And so what we're seeing, there was a lot of contention over those as they came out and a lot of fussing. But what we tried to do, especially on the state model code committee, was work with our committee members from around the nation. What works in your state? What works in your state? We had one of our commissioners was the OIT manager for the state of Wisconsin, and they had a hell of a good railroad statute and access for crossing. And so we built that into there. I can't get that passed in my state right now. You'd think that, well, anyway, so, it works great in a lot of states. And so what we're seeing is that as we have been able to bring together all these great ideas and then push them out to the different companies and industry partners, they take those out, they talk to their legislators, they talk to their folks in different cities, and well, that's a great idea. We'll adopt this, we'll adopt that. So there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of opening up the industry in the last couple of years, and we're seeing a lot of leaders be open to these suggestions of how to deploy things easier, for sure.
Andy, I mean, you are likely very responsible, I think, for some of your clients' success in this regard. Is there any examples you'd like to point to, or principles that you've sort of had your clients follow in order to sort of achieve some of their success with respect to permitting? Or
Sure. I mean, the one thing I've learned is that the client's success are 100% theirs.
Strong answer.
Thank you.
And not the lawyers. I mean, I think it's very clear. I mean, I was senior VP legal regulatory at MFS. We tried to get a stronger provision 251 in the Telecom Act, which helps in 253, but 253 was the only provision that the sponsors, a Markey and Field sponsored, that was watered down and not enacted, because of basically opposition from the National League of Cities. And if you asked me in 1996, what was the biggest problem, the biggest headwind on fiber construction, I would have said it's local municipality permitting. And I think that's still very much the case today, followed by pole and conduit attachments. And, we've made a lot of progress, as we've just heard, but, there's no silver bullet. I mean, it really is a city by city, a state by state utility by utility process. The rules are becoming simplified, and I think that helps. But, just having very good relations, personal relations with the utilities, with the cities, showing that it's a win-win proposition helps. And, as we heard, basically you'll get a lot more progress, with honey than vinegar. So, having those kind of positive relationships is very helpful. And we're now beginning, we'll probably talk about this later, beginning to proceed with those kind of relationships with the railroads, which is probably, the next headwind we're going to face.
Yeah.
Just to build on what Andy just said, I mean, that's so true. And Andy's one of my lawyers, and I'm going to write your quote on your next invoice. These successes are mine, Andy. They're not yours. But every cog, we come up with all these rules and or tear away the old rules and try to make streamline the process. But the reality is, every cog in this machine is made of flesh and bone and has got a will of their own. So and oftentimes don't care and have never heard of the new proceeding at the FCC. And that doesn't mean a damn whit to them in their small little community in Batavia, New York, or Fairhope, Alabama, or parts in between. So personal relationships, being there, picking up the phone, flying there, going to speak to the city council, that is 100% a better way to handle things than trying to bring the hammer every time.
Following up on that, I think I'm going to sneak ahead one question, everybody, in your program here to number 4 here, and I want to ask, what's the appetite that we're seeing in a lot of these state broadband offices for change to address some of these streamlining and permitting issues? How are your companies, your clients, Andy, working to encourage further streamlining efforts as part of this federal push to deploy broadband? Jill, you want to get started?
Sure, I'm happy to start with that one. It was interesting. I was listening to Evan a few minutes ago, and he was talking about how you need to go and meet with each of your broadband offices, which is what First Light has been doing. I hope we're on a first name basis. If we're not, shame on us, we will be. But it's those discussions and the personal relationships that Kelly is talking about. You build a rapport. What we did is we went to each office with our maps. We showed them our networks, and we also collaborated with them as to where we think the unserved and underserved populations are and how we can work together to help bring connectivity there. While we were at those meetings, we have taken the opportunity to discuss barriers we've seen with prior builds as a lessons learned, and positioned it that you now have the ability to avoid the mistakes and the sins of the past. So we have met with the various offices, pointed things out like pole attachments, make ready. Those in our geography are a very big issue, local permitting. And the positive is it's been extremely well received. So we'll continue to take those measures and keep those dialogues ensuing.
One of the great takeaways from the last panel are that state broadband commissions are going to be permanent. They're now in place before BEAD. They'll be in place after BEAD. And what that means is, for the first time, broadband companies and contractors now have a clear advocate in state government. Oftentimes, the public utility commissions were reluctant to be an advocate. They were balancing a number of issues. Oftentimes, you had to find people in the economic development office of a state to be an advocate. But the broadband commissions look at their mission as expanding broadband throughout the state. And we've used that already in about a half a dozen different instances, mostly using broadband commissions to leverage our clients' issues with cities. Cities that are unreasonable, taking too long, with franchises in two instances just last week in Colorado, another instance in the Southeast. We got the Broadband Commission to weigh in with electric utilities. And you'd say, well, why would the electric utilities care about the broadband commissions? Because the broadband commissions are really an advocate themselves for the governor's office. Okay, in almost every state, they've been appointed by the governor. They're acting in concert with the governor's office. And that is a powerful tool to use in the state. And that's something, again, I believe that's going to last well beyond, the BEAD funding.
And I would say in our stakeholder outreach, we're doing a lot of the same things, reaching out to broadband offices as well as individual jurisdictions to make sure that they know what they can do to make sure that they're ready for broadband, because everyone knows that this is a historic level of funding. Everyone knows that it's coming. And so it's looking at their permitting procedures, making sure that their fees are rational and cost-based, making sure that they have their permitting offices have the right resources. Are they working remotely? Especially during the pandemic, this was an issue. They weren't able to accept electronic submissions of permitting materials. So making sure they have laptops and really sort of simple and straightforward things, making sure that they're looking at innovative construction methods. So that's the sort of advocacy that we're engaged in, and making sure that cities know how they can prepare themselves for to be recipients of this funding.
Just echoing everything that everyone has said, going back to what Andy was just talking about, that has been a huge sea change, is these broadband offices, and I'm in them all the time, and they're typically, or most of them are cabinet level positions. So what the governor's done is he's tied the success of this whole thing to his or her political success. That's a huge deal, right? And so when you walk in, the attitude is very welcoming. It's like, show me your maps. Let's talk about what we can do. I mean, they're very open to this. Typically, the governor has appointed a business-oriented person, right? And so that it's a complete change from the way we used to have to deal with a lot of governmental entities. So it's terrific. It is going to last going forward. The magic phrase, it seems, for politicians now is rural broadband. We're bringing broadband to rural America, and every politician has got this, whatever that, they've got their own vision of what that is, but you can just see their eyes mist over when you start talking about rural broadband. And so for those of us who really make a specialty of building out to tier 2 cities and into rural America, I mean, that's just right in our stew pot. And so it's a good place to be, and right now it's a good time. But it's still, going back to the other thing Andy said, you've always got to you've got to be there. You got to go talk to the people, look them in the face, no matter where that is, or if it's Tuesday night at 6:30 in the evening, you got to be there for that kind of stuff.
Lindsay?
And just to put a little bit of a different angle, because my perspective is more at the federal level on these issues, but I just wanted to flag, so at the end of last year, the FCC put out its communications marketplace report, which INCOMPAS filed comments in. And this is the report that FCC is required to put out every other year on the state of the communications marketplace in every sector. And I just thought it was interesting because there is an entire section essentially devoted to the barriers to deployment. They call it the entry and expansion into the communications market, which addresses all the various barriers to deployment that we're talking about in today's panel, and all the different proceedings at the FCC to address it. And they do acknowledge some of INCOMPAS's comments, which is a good thing. And so I do think that that's a positive acknowledgement, and as you say, maybe appetite at the federal level to address these issues, which I think is really key, because the whole point of this panel is because, of course, mitigating these barriers is critical to INCOMPAS and our members. when our members are already deploying, they're facing additional barriers than others. And so making sure that they can deploy quickly and efficiently is really the key here, and is the key to competition. So just don't want that to get lost. But also I just wanted to recognize at the federal level, there seems to be acknowledgement of these issues, which is a good thing.
Well, this is all very encouraging so far. I'm liking what I'm hearing. Unfortunately, there are still challenges. I want to spend the last 20 minutes talking about three of them. I'd like to talk about railroad crossings. I'd like to talk about the upcoming expiration of the ACP and what we can do about it. And then finally, I want to dive into the pole attachment and pole replacement issue. Andy, if I could start with you. Recently, a number of states have indicated that they want to tackle this persistent problem of railroad permitting approvals. Walk us through, how this issue is impacting providers, how some states are responding to the railroads' historic approach to permitting, and then to the rest of the panel, what is the correct approach to addressing concerns you might have about how railroads are handling this issue currently? Andy?
Sure, Chris. So, I mean, this is really the situation where, the wheel hits the rail. I mean, what we're seeing as an industry now, as we're beginning to cure some of the pole and conduit attachment issues, is what a headwind rail crossings are, both in terms of cost. We've seen situations where railroads are charging $20,000 per rail crossing. We've seen situations where railroads are taking up to 18 months to approve permitting. These are just two recent examples that came out of the legislative hearings a few months ago in Virginia. So you really have four different classes of railroads, and they really treat this differently. But particularly with the middle mile funding, the BEAD funding, it's going to be very difficult not to cross railroads. So this is really going to impede construction, particularly given the 4-year timeline to build BEAD. So you have your big five. You have your two eastern railroads, CSX, Norfolk Western, Southern. You have in the west, Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe. You have Kansas City Southern. A whole nother class, actually sometimes more challenging, are the Canadian roads, Canadian National and Pacific, that bought the Grand Trunk and the Soo Line. You have about 650 short lines, and then you have about 60 or 70 public transit districts. I mean, think, WMATA, think BART. And those are actually becoming a lot more challenging just because of their fiscal needs. And so what we've seen is a number of industry groups are banding together in the states to try to have homogeneous laws applying to rail crossings. And probably the template is Iowa. And it's interesting because Iowa has the largest number by far of RLECs in the country, 99 actually, that were really the motivator behind the Iowa law. And the Iowa law basically gives the railroads shot clock of 30 days and $750 per rail crossing. And also with an ability to file a complaint, or if the railroads are taking too long, and giving the railroads some opportunity in unusual cases for safety to ask for more time. But it's beginning to be more like pole attachments, and if the railroads do have an issue, they need to identify that issue. You just can't file an application and they identify problem A, you cure it, and oh, by the way, then they've identified problem B, and so on and so forth. And so similar laws have been passed in Minnesota, Illinois, amazingly in Nebraska, where the Union Pacific is headquartered. And, some of those laws have a $1,500 per crossing, but at least it's capped. And most of the laws have a 30 or 35-day shot clock. yeah, we're now seeing the issue work its way up through the Virginia legislature. Yeah, we're seeing it's beginning to work in Maryland and Delaware. But as somebody said earlier, the problem is a lot of these state legislatures only meet every other year, and only then, for a few months a year. And a lot of these railroads have enormous power in the states, and it's often easier, to stop a bill than it is to enact a bill. And it's our view, and I know Chip has picked up, the leadership here, that this is an issue that really should be addressed nationally. And we have some good templates. We have Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Illinois. There's some good procedures in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that can serve as a model. And hopefully, we won't have to wait for legislation. I mean, because I just don't think we have the time to wait for legislation. Hopefully, if we put a template together, we can get the railroad trade associations, the AAR, American Association of Railroads, American Short Line Association, to come to the table, work around the template, that would be comparable to a Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska kind of solution, because we really need this now. I mean, to wait for a legislative solution, to go through committees, be passed by both houses, I just think is going to be too long, particularly with the mid-mile grants going to be approved starting this month. So, hopefully we can reach some sort of solution, and I have a high degree of confidence, with Encompass's leadership that we will.
I hope that's true. I will say, we did put a model together. The state model code at the BDAC, chapter 11, I believe, is based on the Wisconsin, Nebraska, everything you just said, Andy. And we took the leadership to try to push that in our little test lab in Alabama. And the railroads lost their minds, right? It's all about the fiber industry is against public safety, right? That was their main issue. The fiber industry is against public safety, and the fiber industry is not respective of private property rights, because in their mind they own all of that right away. Well, they don't own a lot of it, frankly, and when you press them on that, that's also an issue. So I hope you're right, Andy, but it has not been my experience that has been the case in the last couple of years, frankly. The way we tend to that all the time is just dealing on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes I bring Andy gets involved in it, or Tamara does, but the reality is, I mean, it's the timing. It takes forever to get done. It's extremely expensive. They say they'll have a watchman out there to be there when we're performing our work, and the once we coordinate everything and the guy never shows up. There's all these issues, and it's every time. And yes, it would be great if we could all get together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and get it to work right. But I don't see it happening. And the one time that we tried to introduce that into a state legislature, the railroads got together and just blasted us and went down in fire.
So Kelly raises, I mean, I agree with that. Kelly raises also two other points, two other aspects of the Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska bills. A, if the railroads are in abandoned right away, the telephone carriers aren't required to pay. B, if the railroads are in public right away, secondly, the telephone carriers aren't obligated to pay. And often the railroads don't know. I mean, sometimes you have to do your own land study, but a lot of, first of all, there's an enormous amount of abandoned rail across the country. And second, a lot of rail is actually in public right away. And I'd add one third thing. I have sympathy for the public transit districts, but public transit districts are by definition in public right away. And, I think they need to get their, revenues elsewhere and not, to hold, fiber construction hostage.
Jill or Van, like to
We
weigh in.
agree.
I would say absolutely.
I'm saving my
agree.
powder for poll attachments.
I think Andy has said it all.
Okay. Want to jump to ACP real quick. We've, more and more we're hearing that, ACP is a driver for broadband deployment. And so, Lindsay, let me ask you, we've heard today from Commissioner Starks, who, basically sort of signaled his intention to seek more sustainable funding, I think, for ACP. Tell us a little bit more about the program, what its future is, and then to the rest of our panelists, have you participated in it, and how would you like to see Congress or the FCC address the program's future?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So ACP right now is not a barrier, but the reason I'm on the panel to talk about it is because if it doesn't get replenished with the funding, then we're nervous that it's going to become a serious barrier to deployment. And so we've heard a lot about the ACP today, but just to give some quick background for those of you who are not as familiar, the Infrastructure Act appropriated $14.25 billion to set up this program, and it provides low-income households with $30 a month towards a discount for their broadband services and up to $75 for qualifying tribal lands. And there are currently 16 million households enrolled. So that's households, so it's more than 16 million individuals. And that's out of the 52 million households that are estimated to be eligible for the program. So right now we're looking at about a 30% take rate, but that's growing every day. And the program is scheduled to be depleted. People aren't quite positive, but they're estimating around early to mid 2024, which really means that providers participating in the program have to wind down this program and alert their customers towards the end of this year. So it's really a this year problem that we're looking at. So INCOMPAS's position is that Congress needs to extend the funding for the ACP. And as Chris mentioned, Commissioner Starks, when he was here earlier, he called for sustained funding of the program. And I was really thrilled to hear that because that's a big deal. And I haven't at least heard him talk about that publicly. So we're really happy to hear that he supports sustained funding to that program as well. And so I think it might be a little bit more obvious why it's important or at least helpful for the affordability side. But the ACP has been really key for deployment on the provider side as well, because it's increased the incentives and the abilities for providers to deploy in certain areas. So when providers are thinking through their plans, they often need to prioritize building in areas with a high concentration of potential customers in order to generate a return on their investment. But the ACP really changes this for them, especially for rural areas, because it's led to more guaranteed customers for these providers, which helps their business case to reach more subscribers. And so this also means that a long-term commitment to ACP will be helpful for the BEAD agenda and for its success, because when putting together their BEAD project proposals, providers are going to need to be making assumptions about their projects and their long-term revenues in each area. And so it starts to get complicated now that so many subscribers have gone into this program and providers have taken that into account for their deployment. If the ACP now runs out, it could mean that some providers have to default on their bids, which of course would not be a good thing. And just a couple more points here on the affordability side. As I mentioned, the program is growing every day, as we heard in the previous panel, every month. And so this would mean if it's not replenished, if it's not sustainable program, it would mean kicking 16 million households off the program. And so that's of course really bad for these individuals, but I think we could look at this at a more macro level. That's really not good for the economy. Two of the main reasons we're using our internet connection is working remotely and applying for jobs. So kicking people off the internet is going to be excluding them from the economy. And the other side of that means that getting people connected means that they'll be adding to the economy. So I think that we should be looking at it both at the individual level, but also at a bigger level. And so Encompass is part of a larger coalition made up of a diverse group of stakeholders that is seeking congressional support to extend the funding to replenish the ACP. And I think that it's a really rare moment to have a program where so many different stakeholders agree. We have consumer groups that want it, we have providers that want it. And I think that Congress should really take this momentum and extend the funding and capitalize on this moment.
Other panelists have thoughts on how we handle the future of ACP?
Sure, I'm happy to chime in. So First Light, we actually have 2 ILECs in the state of Maine that are participants in the program. We partnered with the state on public relations and encouraging our customer base to sign up. It is a little discouraging, the percentages that Lindsay just articulated, which I think are consistent with what we were seeing in terms of eligible households. I was actually encouraged when Trent spoke earlier about improvements that they're going to make to the process for both providers and consumers to sign up, because I would say that was something that we found a little clumsy, as did some of our customers. But working with Encompass, we of course are also supportive of extending the funding and continuing that support for the customers in our ILEC who have availed themselves of this very critical need.
I mean, I 100% agree with that. I'd also like to see personally some of the NTIA digital equity grants go to education and adoption to take up more, take rate for ACP, particularly in very hard to reach communities, where there's, language barriers, age barriers, other kind of barriers. And so, while, 16, 17 million is great, I mean, I think we can and should do better.
I'm going to beg the audience's forgiveness because we do need to talk about pole attachments and pole replacement. And when I get up in the morning, one of the first things I think about when I think about work is this issue. So you can imagine how Van feels because he lives and breathes this every day. So Van, there's been a number of folks here today talking about this issue. I would be curious, just to sort of, if you could sort of break down for folks what the issues are, I think, when it comes to this issue of pole replacement. Crown Castle has been a thought leader on this. You all have put together some economic studies for the commission to consider. So can you tell us where we stand? And then for the rest of the group, it's important to remember that the FCC only has jurisdiction, over states that have indicated that they are not going to regulate their own polls. So there's a whole group of other polls that need to be considered as well. How do we take that into consideration, and where do we go from here? And when might the commission act? And then, sorry, Van, but if you had any response to what Trent was saying about coalition building around this issue and trying to get to a place where both sides are collaborating in a way that gets them to a solution.
Chris, thank
It's
you
a
so
lot.
much. I thought you'd never ask. You wake up and think about this issue. I think about it right before I go to bed every night.
How do you sleep?
I don't. So this issue came before the FCC quickly in 2020 when the cable industry filed a petition for declaratory ruling asking the FCC to look at its pole replacement cost allocation formula. The FCC dealt with that petition by issuing an order in 2021 that essentially affirmed its prior precedent and said that a utility may not impose the entire cost of pole replacement on an attacher when the attacher is not the sole cause of the pole replacement. So it's a fairly simple clarification, but it doesn't really give us enough in practice to prevent the practices that we're seeing with pole owners today, which, so the FCC's rule is essentially that the cost causer pays. What we're in practice seeing is that when we apply to attach to a pole for fiber or for small cells, we are paying 100% of the cost of the new pole, even though the utility is getting a brand new pole that they own for free. And so this is a huge issue for us because the cost to replace a pole can be $10, $20, $50,000, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the size of the pole, the class of the pole, and what all needs to be done. So it's a huge issue for broadband deployment. So the FCC, after it, it issued the 2021 clarification, it put out a notice of proposed rulemaking last year that said, okay, we're going to look at this as a rulemaking because there's a number of issues that we need to consider. And the comment cycles for that are now closed. I can tell you sort of where the parties are and where Crown is in terms of this issue. But we're asking the FCC to basically clarify that we shouldn't be paying 100% of the cost of every pole because the pole owner is getting a direct benefit from a pole replacement, even if the sole cause of the pole replacement is to expand capacity. The pole owner is getting a brand new pole, a stronger pole, more durable, taller, and it could, there's more space on the pole for more attachers that it can then charge to attach to its pole. So that's sort of the crux of the issue. I think the industry, the competitive attachers that are members of INCOMPAS are pretty much aligned on this issue: cable, fiber, small cell. The issue is the pole owners don't, they don't want to change the status quo. They have totally unequal bargaining power when it comes to this issue because time is on their side. And so when we get an unreasonable make-ready estimate, we have to pay it because we have customers to serve. The pole owner benefits from that delay. So if we take time, months, to question the reasonableness of an invoice, asking for additional detail about the invoice, or breaking down sort of, okay, well, we're going to pay this much because we think that there was a pre-existing condition on the pole, that costs our customers time because we have delivery timelines to meet. So that, I think, that the crux of the issue is making sure that there's a fair cost allocation between a new attacher and the pole owner that recognizes the benefit that the pole owner is getting from a brand new pole. We've also asked the FCC for pole owners to share a little bit more information so that we can plan our route more effectively. And the pole owners in their comments have said, no, they don't want to do that. It would allow us to avoid the poles that have pre-existing conditions. Whether we want to concede that we'll pay for that at all, we can just avoid that issue. We'll plan our route to go a different way to avoid poles that are already, they have pre-existing conditions or need replacement. We're also asking the FCC for more expedited dispute resolution, also because of that unequal bargaining power. Time is on the utility pole owner's side. And so to have a resolution, in 6 months for an access issue or longer, almost a year possibly for other sorts of issues, that doesn't comport with our delivery timeframes. And so we're asking the FCC to resolve these issues for active deployments within 90 days, which by itself, even if it doesn't increase the number of complaints that are being brought, by itself, having a faster dispute resolution will hopefully incentivize utility pole owners to not, misbehave and not ignore the rules. So that's sort of where we are right now. We're pushing the FCC for action on this issue because we think it's a huge issue for us and for the rest of the competitive attacher industry who are trying to deploy fiber and small cells for and connect more Americans.
Kelly, Jill, any?
Van has hit everything that I was going to say. But the only other thing I'd add to that is, don't forget, at the end, and we all know this, at the end of these delivery timelines that we will now have issues with, that Van talks about so eloquently, is us having a financial penalty for not delivering for our customer, right? So obviously the utilities know that. So at the end of the day, it's fine. The hell with it. We'll just have to write the damn check, and put in the expensive or the so we can get things done faster, so we can not only deliver for our customer, because we want to deliver for Crown like we do for you guys all the time, but we also don't want to have to take a hit on our contract because we've got a delay, right? So.
But Jill, you operate in a couple of states where they regulate their own polls. If the commission were to act, would that help you all? Yeah, I think in terms of those states, your
It
deployment in those states.
Absolutely would help because the commission is still the gold standard. And to be able to go to the states and say to them, this is what the FCC, after a robust rulemaking process, has determined is very persuasive. Now, we have to be a little careful because, the notion of home rule and we know best for our state, but we can navigate that. But it absolutely would be helpful. And it is an issue that we, like my colleagues on the panel here, are facing. And I do think Van did a terrific job articulating the issue.
Well, if you want an answer as to whether or not we think we can build a coalition to help the FCC solve this issue, we're going to have that discussion outside. But please join me in thanking these panelists. Thank you for your indulgence as we went a little over time. And please welcome back to the stage our CEO, Chip Pickering.
Chris, thank you very much. I want to thank our board, thank all of our sponsors, an amazing lineup of speakers and leaders who came today to be with us. And we're just very grateful to everybody who's made today possible. Angie Cronenberg, our president, newly made president, and her team putting this together have been simply amazing. So we want to thank again everybody. There are drinks outside tomorrow, but real quickly, tomorrow we have our day on the Hill, and if you want to join us, please contact Caroline Olson. Email her. She's coordinating everything for us tomorrow. Let me make one last quick remark. Our friend Gigi Sohn withdrew today. We were proud of her yesterday. We're proud of her today, and we're proud of her tomorrow. And her voice will be strengthened, and we'll continue to find ways to work with her to promote competition in the public interest and the best for the consumers. The reality is the commission still needs to be full. We need 5 commissioners to do the work of the country, the very important work that we're all doing. Sometimes you lose battles, and sometimes in the long term, you win the long game. And we plan to do so as we go forward on the FCC. But thank y'all again, everyone who's participated today, who's made today possible. We have enjoyed it. So thank y'all.